the circulatory system. What are its functions? The first one is to transport oxygen, which is just O2, and carbon dioxide, CO2, around the body. Another function, it's to distribute nutrients. Remember in the previous video where we learned about the small intestine and the digestive system with the help of accessory organs absorbing the nutrients from the food passing through it. It goes through the capillaries so that it can go into the blood and then go around the body. You see how there's a connection now, right? So the distribution of nutrients from the digestive system is now working together with the circulatory system. Okay, and then there's also a transport of wastes. A good thing to note, the circulatory system, first thing that pops into your head is blood, right? Well, blood can also be filtered out as well as a waste product. How do we filter out the blood? We urinate it out. That's waste as well. So the circulatory system also works in conjunction with the excretory system, the waste system too. So there are 11 systems out there. Circulatory system is one of them, but they all work in conjunction with one another. All right, it also maintains body temperature. And the last one, it circulates hormones. And this is also our key in the endocrine system, another system that's part of the 11 systems that work in conjunction around the body. You see, it goes hand in hand with the circulatory system as well. So the circulatory system is a big bridge that works with other systems. So it's very important. Okay, in this image here, we're just gonna divide it in half. Let's first look at the open circulatory system. This is one type of system of the circulatory system. So the open circulatory system, it's found in smaller organisms because in smaller organisms, they tend to be less complex. All right, so it's more simple, this one, where the blood is contained in blood vessels, but only for a part of the time, so not all the time. So let me explain. So I know this kind of looks like an arrow, but it's not. Okay, this is just one of the structures of this system. Okay, the arrows should be going out in that direction, and the same thing from here out in that direction. All right, where is it going from? Well, obviously there is a heart. Even for less complex organisms, they have hearts too. So hearts obviously have valves. Okay, so within these valves, it makes sure that something called the hemolymph, they typically just bathe organs. This gets pushed out of the heart and into the body cavities. Why? Because it needs to transport the blood. The blood gets pumped from the heart, right? So blood is being pumped. So blood pumped. All right, same thing over here. How is it going to be pumped to the rest of the body? Through what? Through arteries. Okay, so I'm going to be putting a line through here and a line through here. These are arteries. And the arteries just literally take that blood and pumps it out to where it needs to go, towards the capillaries, because it's the capillaries, because they're way, way, way thinner than the arteries, the capillaries are able to ensure that the materials like the dissolved gases, the nutrients in that blood can actually pass through and interact with the cells, and then chemical reactions can occur, right? So I'll just put here in green. All right, so maybe this area over here, I'll highlight it as capillaries. Okay, and that's it, and then just bathes the organs. It's not going to go back to the heart, okay? So it's not going to be very cyclical. It just gets what it needs to get from its reservoir and just pumps it through the arteries to the capillaries. Same thing with this side, through the arteries and then to the capillaries. And it just keeps doing that. All right, so I'll put here blood bathes internal organs directly. So in contrast, this closed circulatory system, it's found in larger organisms because they tend to be more complex. Again, there's nuance to this, but on average, yes, the larger ones tend to be more complex. And in here, the blood is always, I repeat, always contained in vessels. Here it doesn't. Once it goes into the capillaries, it just bathes directly to the body cells. Here they're always in vessels until it even goes back to the heart. Because here, remember, it doesn't go back to the heart, right? It's just one direction this way and one direction that way, right? In a closed circulatory system, it's a bit different. Again, there is a heart, there's valves, but it pumps it out. Let's say the arrows as illustrated here. This would be the artery because it takes the blood that is being pumped out of the heart where it needs to go. And then eventually the blood is going to hit capillaries. When it goes to different parts of the body, it's going to hit capillaries. Again, very, very, very thin walls, right? So this is where diffusion likes to occur to ensure that the transportation of materials can get through so that the cells can get what they need. But this is going to be more cyclical as opposed to this one because that used up blood that you just gave to the capillaries is now going to be recycled back towards the heart. You can call it the dirty blood. Or if you were to look down at your skin, you see blue blood, right? This is the deoxygenated blood, the blood that has been used up, that's already been passed into the capillaries to where it needs to go, to the other body cells. So it needs to get oxygenated again. It needs to get more oxygen. So I'll do it in blue here. We have now transitioned into a new type of blood vessel, the vein. All right, so now the veins are going to carry all that blood that's been used up over here, and now it's going to go back towards the heart. And then it's going to interact with like the lungs, it's going to get oxygenated, and then the whole thing just happens again, and it just recycles again and again and again. So there's a lot of recycling happening over here as opposed to the open circulatory system. So materials are exchanged between, or this is between, blood and cells. Directly, blood and cells. So looking at this, what is it? It is an artery. So I'll put it up here. This is an artery. They are thick and they're elastic. And you can notice that immediately, right? Like look at these walls, the thickness of these walls, very, very thick compared to this one. So you probably guessed what this is, right? This would be the vein, right? So I'll just put this up here. For now, we'll fill it in soon. Okay, but you see how the walls here are way thinner in thickness. You got to be elastic because in order to push the blood all around the body, this thing has got to expand, right? The space in here has got to expand. If it doesn't expand very well, it's going to be too rigid and the blood is not going to be able to be pumped through with a lot of force. Got to be flexible. So you know what, I'll put here flexible as well. Flexible. All right, so that space in there is technically actually smaller in diameter, right? You see that space? As opposed to this one, it's way longer. So the diameter is actually smaller. So I'll just put diameter smaller. And again, because the thickness is so wide, as opposed to this one where it's so thin. So I'll just put here also, so all the arteries, right, these ones here, carry oxygenated blood. Away from the heart. There is an exception though. The exception is the pulmonary artery. Now what would that be? Well, obviously it's an artery, okay? So it pushes blood away from the heart, but it deals with pulmonary, right? Sounds like lung, right? So, like I showed you earlier on, how is that dirty blood, that deoxygenated blood, how is it going to get oxygen again? It's going to be thanks to this guy, the pulmonary artery. It is an artery. It's going to carry blood away from the heart, but it's not gonna be oxygenated, okay? Because it's an exception. It's gonna carry deoxygenated blood away from the heart, right? So that dirty blood, again, in summary, it's gonna be carried away from the heart, carrying deoxygenated, okay? Not oxygenated. It's gonna carry deoxygenated blood to where? Towards the lungs, so that it can be rich in oxygen again. I'll show you this in a diagram shortly to aid in your understanding. Okay, and I'll also just put here it can withstand high pressure from the heart. Now you notice what this thing has, right? I'll put it in green here. It looks like a valve, okay? The artery does not have that. So let's add that here. No valves. No valves. I'll explain why. In a vein, they're obviously very thin and still elastic. Maybe not as elastic as the arteries, but it's still elastic. So maybe we can just put not flexible. All right, it's still elastic, but it's not as flexible. Let's put the little distinction there. All right, diameter is obviously larger because the walls are so thin. All right, I'll put here, they all carry. What's the opposite of the artery, right? When the artery's done its job, who's up next? It's the vein that takes over, right? So it's going to carry the deoxygenated blood. But this is going to be towards the heart. But there is an exception, except for the pulmonary vein. All right, pulmonary, again, lung. So this time the pulmonary vein, same thing, it's going to carry blood toward the heart, but it's going to carry oxygenated, okay? Not deoxygenated. It's going to carry oxygenated blood because at this point, it's already rich in oxygen. The lungs have already fed that blood oxygen when you breathe in oxygen from the environment. So this vein, it's going to carry blood to the heart so that it can be pumped out to the rest of the body. If the body is going to be getting this blood, it's obviously got to be oxygenated, not the deoxygenated. This one withstands low pressure because it doesn't need to go and push blood to every single place in your body, right? From the top of your head to the lowest depths to your feet. It doesn't need to push it all around the body because it doesn't have to be so strong. It's just pushing blood back towards the heart, okay? But it does have valves though. Has valves. Okay? Why? To ensure that the blood doesn't have any backflow. You don't want it to go backwards. So for example, blood from your feet. You want to make sure that deoxygenated blood goes towards the heart easily. You don't want it to stop and not get there. So the valves are there to make sure that it never goes backwards. It just keeps helping it to push back up. And this middle section here are the capillaries. Okay, right there. It's extremely thin. Extremely thin. This is good so that diffusion can happen from the blood with the cells at different places of the body, the different body parts. Okay, it's actually only about 1 cell thick. Very, very thin. Okay, and it's the smallest type of blood vessels. So connects arterioles to the venules. And I'll explain what those are. So we just looked at arteries, right? So this here is an artery. This here is a vein. They are going to meet over here, okay? Because this is taking blood from the heart. Okay, let's say the heart is somewhere like here, okay? And it's taking that nice rich blood to the body, okay? So let's say it meets a body part over here. This artery is getting smaller, right? It's getting thinner over here. So we deem it as an arteriole. It's just an artery, okay? It's just a lot thinner now, so we just deem it as a new name, arteriole. And it wants to give that rich blood that we got from here right over there. So because the capillary has extremely thin walls, it can easily go through and then go into the cell. After the cell gets what it needs, it's going to take that dirty blood over here and make its way. Yes, I don't know why there's an arrow there. It should be the opposite direction. It's going to make its way towards the bigger portion of this vein. All right. So because this is a smaller portion of the vein, we are going to be calling this a venule. It is a vein, it's just smaller. Just like how an arteriole is a smaller version of an artery. All right, then it's now going to go towards the big portion of the vein, making sure that it goes back to the heart. And again, the valves are there to ensure it doesn't go backwards. We don't want it to go back that way. We want it to keep going that way. All right. All right. There's little flexibility here. Okay, at the capillary. All right, and there's no valves. No valves either, like the arteries. And like I've emphasized quite a bit already, gas exchange happens here. Okay, at the capillaries. And I also want to emphasize here, if there's a high concentration of oxygen, so let's just put a lot of oxygen here. Okay, all these dots are oxygen. All right, so high oxygen. And let's say this area of space, okay, is the cell, and this one has low oxygen. What's going to happen? Diffusion is going to allow this high amount of oxygen in order to flow through and get to that body cell pretty easily to alleviate that stress, to hit equilibrium. Because it's not comfortable to have so many oxygens over here all clustered together. They want to alleviate that stress, so they're going to go in that direction. The same would apply for CO2 as well. This is why when you're working out a lot and then your carbon dioxide starts to build up because you're breathing heavier, it can't stay in your body. You got to breathe it out. So you're always breathing out carbon dioxide. And because your body is losing so much oxygen, because all that oxygen is going to your body cell over here. Let's say this is a muscle cell, okay? All that high oxygen is going into there. You got to breathe in more oxygen. So somewhere here where the heart is, it's going to be interacting with the lungs, pulmonary veins, the pulmonary artery that we just looked at, to ensure that it gets a lot more oxygen, and then it's going to bring all that oxygen back down in that direction. Another thing to remember, RBCs, the red blood cells, travel in a single file. Not very efficient, but that's the way it is. And you notice how the capillaries here are really branched out. It's like a web, right? So the branching of the capillaries ensure increased surface area, SA, surface area. Obviously, that's a good thing because more diffusion is occurring per second in that amount of time. All right, so when you get a bruise, for example, what's happening? It's just that the capillaries have popped because they're extremely fragile. They're only one cell thick, like I said, right? So due to their thinness, how thin they are fragile. Okay, so what you see there is a pop. All right, and when it gets ruptured through impact, the blood that's contained within them gets released as well. So blood contained in them get released into spaces between the tissues. All right, when ruptured. All right, so this is obviously going to produce some discoloration and swelling, okay? So that's why a bruise looks the way it does. All right, results in color change and swelling. So what you have here are different aspects or parts of your blood separated by their density. So plasma, a yellow straw-like color. of there, it's 55%. But in that particular snapshot that we're seeing here of volume, that specific area of just plasma, 90% of it is actually water. So 90% is water. All right, and then the other maybe like 10% are proteins, dissolved gases, and nutrients, and hormones. Now these proteins are really important within the plasma because a lot of them actually help transport fatty acids. So it transports FA, all right, fatty acids, as well as vitamins, and helps fight infection. It also does some supporting of clots too, but that's more to do with platelets, so I'm just going to leave that out right now, but it does a little bit of that. The red blood cells here, obviously a red-like color. The fancy word for this is the erythrocytes, and they look like donuts, like kind of like disc-shaped, all right? Why do we want them more thinly disc-shaped? The more thin, the more surface area, to ensure diffusion is better, right? Diffusion efficiency. It's also produced in bone marrow. Made in marrow. And I'm sure you remember in your previous grades with mitosis, it's the division of the cells. The red blood cells actually lose their nucleus, so they actually can't divide, because without the nucleus, they have no more DNA. Without the DNA, it can't replicate. Without that, mitosis cannot occur. So I'll just put here in a star. Loses nuclei when mature. So it loses the ability to do mitosis. The red blood cells also contain hemoglobin. You might have heard of this word before. Contains hemoglobin. It's a protein. And the cool thing about this is it contains 4 iron atoms. Why? Because each one forms a weak bond with oxygen. So it helps transport their oxygen. Okay, so it's iron binds with oxygen to increase transportation efficiency. And each red blood cell, each RBC, has like hundreds of millions of hemoglobin. If we didn't actually have hemoglobin, it would make it way more difficult to transport oxygen around the blood, around their body. I think 70 times less. So it's very important that we have hemoglobin within the red blood cells. So people typically think about hemoglobin and associate it with just oxygen, but technically the iron within the hemoglobin can also bind not just to oxygen, but also to CO2 as well, okay? But obviously after the oxygen is released and is used up to the specific body part cells where it needs to go first. Okay, and then it picks up the CO2 after. Now let's look at the white blood cells. They're also known as leukocytes. They are to guard against infection. All right, they also fight parasites, attack bacteria, and they also increase in number when they're fighting infection. Right, so they're very calculated in their approach. Right, a very specific type of guard, WBC, or white blood cell, is known as a macrophage. So macrophages can locate and quote-unquote eat particles. All right, obviously the bad ones, right, like certain types of bacteria, viruses, fungi. All right, all sorts. And don't forget the platelets. Both of these, white blood cells and platelets, make up less than 1% of the blood, of the volume that we're looking at. A fancy word for platelets is a thrombocyte. Platelets also have no nucleus like the red blood cells. Disc-shaped too, increasing their surface area, and they break off special cells in the bone marrow. But the big thing that I want you to know here is that their cell fragments help ensure blood clots. So helps increase blood clots. Now it might sound negative, but when you're bleeding out and you want to make sure that the blood stops quickly, you want to have some blood clotting. So platelets are responsible for that. I know we said plasma does a little bit about that, but majority of it happens with the platelets. All right, how do they do that? Well, they stick to the site where it's where you got cut, for example. Sticks to the damaged site and releases clotting factors to ensure that the blood stops. All right, we're gonna look at this chart now with blood pressure, but obviously first we need to know what blood pressure is. The pressure that is exerted on the arterial walls. Remember that blood vessel that pushes blood away from the heart? By the blood that's circulating. A normal blood pressure is around 120/80. So I'll put BP, all right, for blood pressure. BP is 120/80. All right, 120 is for the systolic blood pressure, so up over here, and 80 is for diastolic. All right, so what is systolic? Look at this thing over here. What does that mean? It's the amount of force your heart exerts on the arterial walls, okay, for every beat, okay, every time it beats. Diastolic, however, measures the force heart exerts in between beats. So as you can see over here, 120/80 is in the normal range. It's obviously better to be lower in the ranges because it means that the heart doesn't have to exert so much force to push out the blood because your heart is so healthy. It's large, it's strong, and you don't have plaques in your artery walls. It's easy to push through. If the walls are extremely clogged up, it's going to require a lot of pressure because if you were to see like a blood vessel here, let's say this is an artery, okay, and there's just plaque buildup everywhere, it's going to increase a lot of turbulence. Or like when you're on a plane, there's a lot of turbulence in certain areas, and the plane is shaking a lot, right? It's very bumpy. So if the blood is trying to get through and there's a lot of turbulent flow, it's difficult to be able to get through this thing. Your heart is going to have to push way harder to be able to get all of this blood through quickly in order to get to your cells throughout your body. If your heart doesn't exert much force, then the blood isn't going to be able to get through as fast, and then you can get a heart attack. So individuals who have systolic and diastolic pressures in these ranges are very prone to heart attacks and be in danger zones of atherosclerosis. I'm just going to put one more final note here. Blood pressure typically decreases as blood flows away from the heart. All right, especially when it goes from the artery to the arterioles to the capillaries. Because the hardest part has finished, right? Heart needs to pump it all out at the very beginning, but once it gets towards the arterioles, but once the oxygenated fresh blood gets to the arterioles and the capillaries, it's pretty much already reached where it needs to go and deliver that fresh oxygen to those body parts, right? Those cells that are there. So blood pressure is obviously going to drop.